last 15 years have seen a boom in Civil War art. If you want to buy an illustration of a Civil War scene, you can find just about, well, not just about any scene. Some scenes don't show up. Which ones do and don't? We'll find out from our guest Gary Gallagher when we return on Civil War Talk Radio.
Hey y'all, this is Stephen Cochran. As a country artist, I have traveled around this great country of ours, often meeting our brave men and women in uniform. And as a Marine and veteran of both the Iraq and Afghan conflict, I know how important it is to thank our troops who defend our freedom each and every day. One of the best ways to thank them is to give their children and spouses the gift of education. Scholarships for 2 years, 4 years, and vocational school. This is exactly what a national charity, Thanks USA, does. Please go to their website, www.thanksusa.org, to make a generous donation to the Thanks USA Scholarship Fund for the families of the troops, and I thank you.
You're listening to World Talk Radio, where the world comes to talk.
Welcome back to Civil War Talk Radio. I'm Jerry Prokopowicz, talking today with author and history professor Gary Gallagher, whose new book, Causes Won, Lost, and Forgotten, deals with how Hollywood has shaped Americans' popular views of the Civil War, and also talks about art, which we'll get to in a minute. I should note that we are having our conversation today on June 6th of 2008, the anniversary of the Allied landings at D-Day, which in turn spawned many movies, from Saving Private Ryan to The Longest Day and others. It also happens to be my wife's birthday. If I were ever to forget that, it would be D-Day at this house, I can tell you. But I didn't. Things are good on that front. Gary, we talked about movies, and the bulk of your book concerns that, and every listener of the show is going to want to get this book. It's got illustrations from the films. It's really an interesting read. But you also talk about Civil War art, not the great art of Forbes or Winslow Homer so much as contemporary art. Talk about that. Who does this art and who buys it?
Well, it's the art. The art that I looked at is the art that's advertised in the popular Civil War magazine, Civil War Times Illustrated, North and South Blue and Gray, and so forth, which is, I assume, the art that people with an interest in the Civil War buy. Civil War buffs, or at least students of the Civil War. So it's a very different audience from the one that goes to films. It's an audience that I think brings a great deal more interest and background about the war to their decision to purchase a piece of art than the people who go to films would bring. The leading artists are Mort Kunstler and Don Troiani and Dale Gallen, John Paul Strain. I mean, there are a handful of artists, I think, who are most prominent in this field and almost certainly sell the most pieces. The most interesting thing to me about comparing themes in art and themes in films is that whereas The Lost Cause is retreating in terms of how Hollywood deals with the Civil War, it's absolutely ascendant in the world of recent Civil War art. That is, Confederate subjects are painted far more often than Union subjects. Lee far more often than Grant, for example. Gettysburg is also very much at the center of things. It's the center of much of the Lost Cause concern about the war, as well as the great turning point, the great high water mark, and so forth. The most painted United States figure in this art is Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, which shows, and the most of the other Union figures who are painted quite frequently also happen to be at Gettysburg. There's also a good deal of attention to the Irish Brigade on the Union side, but all of those Union topics are not painted nearly as often, except Joshua Chamberlain, as the Confederates are. It's just interesting.
We had Don Troiani was on this show June 10th, 2005, for listeners who want to check the archives and hear his view. And my recollection is he did not personally have much of a Lost Cause interpretation.
I'm not saying that any of the artists have a Lost Cause interpretation. I think that, I would assume that they're good businessmen, and that I think the market is there for the lost cause art. I don't think we should infer anything about their personal views of the war. I think that these are the things that sell. I talked to a lot of gallery owners in the course of doing this, and they would, even in Gettysburg, which the last time I checked was not in a former Confederate state and not in a place where the Confederacy won a battle, but there they said that the people who were running the gallery said that Confederate pieces outsell Union pieces 10 or 15 to 1.
So it's just a matter of economic survival. If you're going to be a painter, you're not going to get very far with Grant and Sherman.
Well, I think that you could. I don't think you'll sell as many copies of those things. At least that I would imagine that the pieces that are advertised are the ones that the artists believe would do best. And what I did was count ads in all of these magazines and also look through the books. Each of these artists has published at least one book. Don Troiani has several, and Mort Kunstler has several. John Paul Strain has one. Dale Gallen has a big recent one and had a smaller earlier one. So I looked through those to see what the subjects were and at the ads and talked to gallery owners and so forth. And that was the picture that emerges is that there's a much more vigorous market for Confederate topics, mostly Eastern, Lee, Jackson, Army of Northern Virginia. The one Western figure who gets painted a lot is Nathan Bedford Forrest. He'd be the only one that fits into this.
Now, I would think the very medium itself would predispose toward a romanticized version of the war, because whereas in a movie you could go to see a 2-hour film, and it might have some brutal scene of civilians being tormented or homes burned or women assaulted. Right. And you could stand that and come home. But if you're going to put a picture on your wall that you're going to look at every day, it's not going to be an atrocity scene unless you're really an unusual character.
I'd stay away from someone who wanted to put atrocity scenes on their walls. Yes, I agree with you completely. Of course. And I think the romantic dimension to this art is probably, I mean, from a purchaser's point of view, is probably very important. So you want a lot. So Pickett's Charge would be very important and is very important. I think the Irish Brigade combines a couple of possible markets, the Civil War market and the kind of professional Irish market. There are lots of Irish people in the United States. The Irish Brigade also had great green flags, which make them look different. I think there are different aspects, but there's no doubt that the romanticism, as you suggest, would be one of them.
And color is an interesting point. The Confederates are all multicolored, the butternut and homespun, as well as the various shades of gray. The Union guys are all the same damn blue color.
They are, and other factors. I mean, snow figures in some of the more successful paintings because it's sort of a change of pace. Yes, there are artistic qualities as well as market considerations, I think, that come into play here. But the hard thing to explain, and I can't do this because I can't poll everybody who buys Civil War art, the good question to ask would be why would you rather purchase a piece of Confederate-centered art than a piece of Union-centered art? Why do you want Lee at Chancellorsville or Jackson at Chancellorsville instead of Grant at Vicksburg? There are a lot of Lee and Jackson things together, but none, as far as I could find, of Grant and Sherman, for example, the other great command team, really the greatest command team during the war. I don't know whether part of it is, I mean, Confederate flags are very prominent in a lot of this art. Maybe for some people with the Confederate flag under assault in public places, this is a way by hanging something on your wall at home where you don't have to worry about someone getting angry with you. I don't know, because I didn't poll the purchasers.
Well, it strikes me there is colorful and vibrant art that goes in the other direction that was produced in the 19th century. In Mark Neely and Harold Holzer's work,
yes,
the Union Image.
The Union Image and the Confederate. That's a great pair of books for anyone to look at who's interested in how the Civil War generation saw the war in prints and paintings.
It really is, and the Union Image in particular. There were a set of paintings by de Thulstrup that were made in the late 19th century. Louis Prang produced them as lithographs. We had a set at the Lincoln Museum when I worked there.
They're great. They're absolutely
marvelous.
Wonderful. And I mean, this is one of the striking things, Jerry, that the modern art that deals with Confederate subjects deals with almost exactly the same subjects that late 19th century Confederate things dealt with: Lee and Jackson, Chancellorsville, Gettysburg, the fight at the railroad cut at Second Bull Run, and so forth. But the Union art doesn't. Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain is invisible in 19th century art. He's not on anybody's radar screen. Philip Sheridan was a huge presence in that art. He, as you know, is in 2 of the Prang lithographs, and he's in Kurtz and Allison, and he's in Currier and Ives. He's all over the place. He is virtually absent in the modern art. So is Sherman. Those wonderful Prang lithographs also deal with a lot of Western topics. Western battles are in there. Grant's and Sherman's battles out west. Well, those battles, there are more than 3. I mean, there are literally hundreds of modern paintings / prints devoted to Gettysburg. You can count the ones devoted to Vicksburg on your fingers. It's just amazing.
And even the Chattanooga, the Lookout Mountain, the scenes where you have marvelous landscapes to portray.
Wonderful landscapes. That's right.
But we don't find them today.
No.
Well, that is a mystery. And this is completely disconnected from the academic portrayal of the Civil War today, where the Western theater is looked at.
It's completely disconnected. The West gets... I mean, there's still people who complain. I'm sure that overall the East still gets a little more attention than the West does, and probably always will. But the West is very well represented in the literature now, both in terms of the individual armies. There have been major books on the Army of the Tennessee. There's even a very good one on the Army of the Ohio, I hear.
I've heard about that
book. It's out there floating around.
That's right.
I mean, a recent biography, another one of George H. Thomas. Sherman had repeated biographies in the late 90s and so forth. So the West is getting attention now from scholars, but not so much from artists.
Well, it really is. It is curious. My law school roommate on first day many years ago brought in a portrait of Robert E. Lee to hang in our common room, and I remember thinking, was this a surrogate for a political statement, or was he just interested in history? Why Lee and not Grant or Lincoln?
Right.
And that ambiguity may be intentional.
It could be. No, it could be. I think a lot of people. I mean, this is a question that I would love to be able to answer. Why is the market skewed this way? But I can't answer it. I do know that that's the way it is. I know what sells better, at least if gallery owners and ads and so forth are an indication, and I'm sure they are.
And I would agree with that.
I mean, Don Troiani had a very funny statement. He said that the perfect one would be to have Lee and Jackson and the Irish Brigade in the snow and various other components. That's the one that everybody would want, and I think there's something to that.
There's something. Somebody will come up with that. Well, as we're running a little short on time, but let me ask you, what are you working on next? Where do we go from here? I'm
out at the Huntington working on a book that I'm going to call The American War, which is just going to be kind of my take on what I think is right and wrong with how the war is being interpreted now. And one of my major themes is going to be the absence of a really good sense of how important Union was and why it was important.
Well, that will be something to look forward to. It would be useful to have a text that would help explain that. But I guess we won't really get there until we have a movie that captures that.
That's right. That's what we really need. I'm not holding my breath.
No. I mean, the idea of how you would capture that, what visual image would give people that feeling. One more thought about this: Abraham Lincoln does not feature.
No, I deliberately didn't deal with. I think that's a category all its own, and in fact, I'm going to write, and that's something else I'm going to do over the next 6 or 7 months. I'm going to write an essay on Lincoln in film. There was a book not long ago out on Lincoln in film that doesn't come at it the way I would come at it, and that's something I'm looking forward to, all the way back to that 1930 Abraham Lincoln that D.W. Griffith did with Walter Houston as Lincoln. It's interesting that in that film, Philip Sheridan plays a key. Sheridan's Ride is in that film.
People still knew who Sheridan was.
They still knew who Sheridan was.
The public knew that.
Yeah.
And you could have a Sheridan tank named after him in the 60s.
You could have a Sheridan tank.
Which today would be a mystery, too.
I think even a Sherman tank would be a mystery to many people today.
That's an unfortunate change of things.
And even poor Grant. I mean, Grant was this colossal figure through the 19th century and deep into the 20th century. His tomb was still the most visited place in New York City down to the Depression.
But and it has fortunately been refurbished in the last decade or so. So there's that still to see. Well, Gary, it is always a pleasure talking with you. I appreciate your persistence in making this happen today, and really enjoyed it.
Thanks for the invitation.
And listeners, you'll want to get hold of Causes Won, Lost, and Forgotten. I know you'll enjoy it too, and I want to thank you for listening to Civil War Talk Radio.